Mass incarceration means that we've got a very high rate of incarceration, historically, comparatively. And the other thing is the rate of incarceration is so high, so socially concentrated, that we're no longer incarcerating the individual, but we're incarcerating whole social groups.
I need black people to understand that the Department of Justice has always been a system developed to prosecute black people, not to prosecute black people. Yes, there are white people who are incarcerated. They are called collateral damage. We have to understand that dolphins are caught in tuna nets, meaning that they are not the intentional target. But sometimes shit happens.
Less than 1 in 100 Americans are currently in jail. But for some races, genders, and age groups, that ratio is a lot larger. For example, if you're young, black, and male, it's closer to about 1 in 4. That means you'd have a higher probability of going to jail than of getting married or going to college. These results are unequal and problematic as
And that is the situation, the fact that white people are just so overly criminalized in their nature that they just happen to get caught in a net that was not intended for them does not deviate from the fact that the Department of Justice is designed and developed to directly target and prosecute blacks for their genocide.
Put a few numbers up that just illustrate the scale of the problem. The problem is there are vastly more black people in American prisons and in every category of American punishment than can be justified either in terms of black people's involvement in crime, about which I'll tell you a bit in a minute, or in terms of population presence. 12% of Americans are Afro-American, 12%. At the moment, the American prison population is about 42% black, but actually that's an undercount because the relevant federal agency for political correctness reasons in the 1990s separated Hispanics out of the black and white racial counts. Some Hispanics are also dark-skinned. That's the material, the salient social fact in U.S. courts is black skin. It's not Hispanics.
Well, black people have to understand that from the time that they released you from their chattel slavery, that they have always criminalized everything about who you were as a person. That was the purpose for developing the Department of Justice, was to enact the 13th Amendment clause that says slavery is abolished except for imprisonment. And they've been trying to imprison you back to slavery ever since. The 13th Amendment to the United States Constitution provided that neither slave nor involuntary servitude, except as a punishment for a crime whereof the party shall have been duly convicted, shall exist within the United States or any place subject to their jurisdiction. With the adoption of the 13th Amendment, the United States found a final constitutional solution to the issue of slavery. The 13th Amendment, along with the 14th and 15th, is one of the trio Civil War amendments that greatly expanded the civil rights of America.
The causes of racial disparities in sentencing and punishment in the U.S. are the conscious policy choices of American legislators and government officials to adopt particular kinds of sentencing and correctional policies. That's why we have so many people in prison. That's why we have so disparately many minority people in prison. The cure...
I want black people to pay attention that the fact that the Department of Justice was not established until July 1st, 1870. After blacks received their emancipation in 1865. So within the full 5 years after establishing the emancipation, they established the Department of Justice.
I hope that we will have ended once and for all this notion that is a hangover from the 60s, that somehow Democrats are weak on crime and Democratic presidents are weak on crime and Republicans are tough on crime. The truth is, every major crime bill since 1976 that's come out of this Congress, every minor crime bill, has had the name of the Democratic senator from the state of Delaware, Joe Biden, on that bill, and has had a majority vote of the Democratic members of the United States Senate on the bill. So one of the things I want to do in addition to ending crime is end the political carnage that goes on when we talk about crime. Crime is not Democrat or Republican. Making the streets safe is not a Democratic or Republican issue. This is one of those issues I hope this passage of this bill will be taken out of the gridlock category and moved into an emerging consensus. And the consensus is as follows, and I will cease when I finish this statement.
Joe Biden is asking Republicans to reach a consensus and understanding that the Democrats as well, just like the Republicans, are in agreements with the persecution of blacks using the Department of Justice as the means to do so.
Nowhere in the world incarcerates as much as we do. We've seen extremely high rates of exposure to the criminal justice system for African American men.
The consensus is A, we must take back the streets. It doesn't matter whether or not the person that is accosting your son or daughter or my son or daughter, my wife, your husband, my mother, your parents. It doesn't matter whether or not they were deprived as a youth. It doesn't matter or not whether or not they had no background that enabled them to become socialized into the fabric of society. It doesn't matter whether or not they're the victims of society. The end result.
What Biden is saying is, I don't care about the racial discrimination you have went through as a people to enforce you into a position that makes you more susceptible to crime due to economics. I want you incarcerated because you don't accept your position as less than the rest of America. Because you are not accepting the position of impoverishment that we have placed you in, because you are not accepting of the limited opportunities we have left you in your community, and you have tried to seek means outside of our system that we have allowed for you. We want you incarcerated. That is what Biden is saying. This is why I am not a Trump supporter and I'm not a Biden supporter. U.S. Department of Education, Office of Educational Research and Improvement. General course taking patterns among public high school graduation. Public high school graduates in the class of 1992 earned on average more total credits, more academic credits, and fewer vocational credits than did graduates in the class of 1982.
So if we think about black men who were born in the late 1970s and who are growing up through the American prison boom of the 1980s and the 1990s, the chances that they're going to serve time in state or federal prison if they dropped out of high school is about 70%. So going to prison for that group of black men with very low levels of schooling, that's become a normal life event.
There were increases in academic courses taking stable levels of personal use courses taking an increase in the total number of credits earned. Trends in vocational courses taking varied among the different student subgroups, while vocational courses taking declined among groups defined by gender and parents. Educational attainment, as well as among whites, blacks, Hispanics, and students with no disabilities. Courses taken in the vocational curriculum was unchanged between 1982 and 1992. You have to understand, black people took more vocational in the educational system prior to 1992. When they wanted to do the crime bill and increase the prison boom, you have to understand what they did is they removed vocational training in order to prevent us from having other options of generating wealth. They took woodmaking out of class. They took auto mechanics. They took away skills that you could use to make money out of the public school system in order to lead you into this crime so that you could fulfill their prison systems, so that you could provide jobs for white people in suburban communities. You have to understand that the legal system is set up as a form of genocide for the black community. Rather than invest money into the development of our community, they invested billions of dollars into our genocide.
Running through this, the psychologists can tell us the causes of crime at the individual level, the things that predict criminality, are the same for men and women, even though women have much lower offending rates than men. And they're the same for blacks and whites. So it's the same characteristics of human lives that send people into courts and prisons.
About 1.2 million African American children with a parent who's incarcerated. And that's about 1 in 9. The research shows the kids who experience parental incarceration have diminished school achievement, they have behavioural problems, depressive symptoms, acting out, and there's also evidence that these kinds of negative effects associated with parental incarceration are concentrated more among boys than among girls.
So look at jail. County jails, pretrial detention, sentences under a year. You see about 40% of the people in jail are black. That's the smallest percentage. Get to state and federal prison, you can see there are more blacks than whites in prisons. 12% of Americans count as black. At this point, about 66% of Americans count as white. So blacks are they're vastly more than they ought to be in terms of population rates. 5.5 times higher likelihood of being in prison if you're black in America than if you're white. If you're black male, it's 7 or 8 times.
When we look at crime arrest by race, and we know that blacks are unfairly arrested more than whites, and blacks are the ones who are falsely arrested. So when you look at arrest patterns, you look at the fact that 6,816,975 arrests occurs in America. 4,729,290 of those are white people. Only 1,815,144 of those are black.
The second answer is that the system is biased through and through.
Black male offenders continue to receive longer sentencing than similar situated white male offenders. Black male offenders receive sentences on average 19.1% longer than similar situated white male offenders during the Post report.
Black people are much more likely to be arrested for serious violent crimes than white people are. I'll say something about that. That over-involvement in serious crime is falling significantly, but has not yet shown itself up in imprisonment data.
Violence in an offender's criminal history does not appear to account for any of the demographic differences in sentencing. Black male offenders receive sentences on average 20 to 4% longer than similar situated white male offenders, accounting for violence in an offender's past and
more likely to be in prison than if you're a white male, and so on. Death row. Half the people on death row are black, almost 45%.
I'd like to suggest that I take some small credit for it myself as well, and others, the presiding officer, that there is now a death penalty. And we passed it a couple years ago. If you are a major drug dealer involved in the trafficking of drugs and murder results in your activities, you go to death.
Life sentences, look at that. 66,000 people serving life sentences are black, 47,000 whites. Look at LWOPs, life without the possibility of parole. Blacks are 70% of the total. They exceed whites and Hispanics together. I won't go on. For kids, it was even worse before the Supreme Court decisions that changed all that. So,
blacks lead in various certain areas such as murder, which comes from over hostility in the black community due to the economic castration in our community, and it also comes from us, our aggression due to our impoverished condition and our demasculation of our community.
I'm going to just shout at you some background things that I'm not going to explain because there obviously isn't time. So why are there so many black people in prison? The first answer, the first and obvious answer is because they do more of the stuff that sends people to prison.
But however, rapes, white people lead in, overwhelmingly. Robbery, overwhelmingly, white people lead in. Aggravated assaults, white people lead. Burglary, larceny theft, motor vehicle theft, arson.
The third answer is that American sentencing laws disparately and disproportionately attach harsh penalties to things for which black people are convicted. Those tend to be the answers. So,
since 1986, Congress has passed over 230 new or expanded penalties for drug and criminal offenses in this United States. 230 new penalties. And these penalties range from an automatic 5 years in jail for any person caught with a rock of crack cocaine, a piece of crack cocaine as small as a quarter. I don't have a quarter with me, but if you visualize what one looks like, yeah, I do have a quarter. If you have a piece of crack cocaine no bigger than this quarter that I'm holding in my hand, 1/4 of $1, we passed a law through the leadership of Senator Thurmond and myself and others, a law that says you're caught with that, you go to jail for 5 years. You get no probation, you get nothing other than 5 years in jail. Judge doesn't have a choice. Now,
black people are much more likely to be arrested for drug crimes than whites. However, blacks use drugs either less or about the same as whites do, and all the evidence we have is that as a population matter, blacks don't sell drugs more than whites do. They sell them at times and in places that attract police attention, which has produced vast disparities in drug arrests, drug law enforcement.
I want us to understand that we can take this back to the 70s when Nixon made marijuana a grade A scheduled drug in order to criminalize black people from being caught with marijuana. And as an expense to that, America was unable to practice or test the medical properties of the pain-killing properties of marijuana, and they was able to do that with opiates, and therefore America is an opiate-addicted population due to the distribution of opiate-based painkillers distributed by American pharmaceuticals, all because they wanted to criminalize marijuana in order to mass incarcerate black people. Schedule classification. U.S. Department of Justice background. Schedule controlled substance maintained marijuana is Schedule the number 1 of the Controlled Substance Act. You see this? Marijuana is listed as Schedule 1. The DA Drug Schedule Organization drug introduced groups based on risk of abuse or harm. These drugs with high risk and no counterbalancing benefits are banned from medical practice and are Schedule 1 drugs. A drug of chemical can be treated as a Schedule 1 substance for chemical prosecution, even if it is not a controlled substance. Controlled drugs that are considered to have virtually no risk for addiction, abuse, or harm are not scheduled. Examples of those would be insulin, blood pressure, and chronic medical. Often searched for are marijuana falls into Schedule 1. The Controlled Substance Act was passed in 1970 at a time when there was a war on drugs and the concept of zero tolerance and pot as a gateway drug was mainstream thinking. One of the many unintended consequences of sliding marijuana into Schedule 1 was the restriction it placed on the ability to conduct research to discover if and what are the medical properties of marijuana and what are the dangers without good or even reasonable quality research. Without good or reasonable quality research. I want y'all to understand what this means. The United States government labeled marijuana a Schedule 1 drug, banning it from being able to be used as any means of medical research. So they could not search the pain properties of marijuana in order to make medications to kill pain out of marijuana, but they was allowed to do it out of opiates. So your government is complicit in turning you into drug addicts.
The drugs has never been a problem like we have right now. And by the way, like the world has.
The underlying issue is we've chosen prison as a way to respond to that problem of crime. And there are a whole variety of ways that we could have chosen to respond to that problem of crime. We've chosen the response of the deprivation of liberty. And we've chosen the response of the deprivation of liberty for a historically aggrieved group whose liberty in the United States was never firmly established to begin with.